All right, in case you didn't catch that, starting the recording. So let's get started. Um, so we'll do an alignment first. Find a posture that you can be comfortable for the next few minutes. And take a few deep breaths. My cats are obviously taking some deep breaths here. um, so get present here in this moment, letting go of everything else from the day. And imagine a world full of beings here in this physical form, ones in subtle forms of higher and higher frequencies. And imagine that we all live here together, sharing the same space. Now imagine being able to communicate clearly back and forth. And what it might mean to be able to communicate with the spirit of a tree or the spirits of land. What sort of information would be useful? What could you ask? If you could ask a field, what would be best planted here? If you could ask a tree what kind of home it would create. And imagine also in this subtle beings, you could talk to those who've passed away, like clearly. What kind of comfort could that bring? What kind of information could you find that you needed in order to move on or to wrap things up? So imagine a world where beings on the higher planes can be easily accessed, can give guidance, advice, warnings. And imagine a world where this was common, where everyone knew that this could happen, was happening, they could access it themselves. Imagine a world where our leaders had access to this kind of guidance, advice. Imagine a world where our children were able to access this. A world where you were able to access this clearly. So take a deep breath. Bring yourself back into presence. And I just want to say, like, this is one of my favorite topics. I mean, I guess every time I have one of these classes, I always say that it's one of my favorite topics. I love this stuff. But I feel like the subtle beings, speaking with the subtle worlds, is such a huge part of. Well, it's a huge part of life, but it's a huge part of what's coming, like of the life that's being created, what the future holds, is being able to have this clear communication. And it really excites me that uh, we may end up, in a world where this is normal, where speaking to beings we can't see is considered very normal. And I think children do it naturally. I remember my daughter when she was a baby, she'd have these lengthy conversations, and I asked her who she was talking to. She's like, "Oh, the fairies or the pixies, or oh, I don't know, there's this being, there's this not being," but she's like, "Oh, there's this thing in the corner," or she could describe them. And then as we get older, we shut all those down, either from the outside pressure or even just internally pressure. It doesn't seem to be helpful or useful, or it doesn't match the reality that other people are living in, and so we learn to shut down this way of communicating with the world. But it's really exciting to think that we have a place to turn, like we have answers, we have things. Like if you really needed to know something, you could ask um yeah, you could ask the field what would be best planted. You could ask the plant what its uses are. um for medicine. There's so many things that could be communicated and are communicated quite easily. And when we learn to have access to that, your world becomes easier because you have guidance. It's like everything's able to give you advice. But also part of that world is knowing who to listen to and who not to listen to, and that's part of what we'll go over in the class. So it's a super useful, and also it's a day-to-day practice, this being able to talk to subtle beings. So when we talk about subtle beings, we need to talk about the planes of existence. So in the esoteric teachings, there's the 7 planes of the lower level, which is actually the first plane of the higher planes, but whatever. We're going to stick with those 7 lower planes. So in those, like the lowest is the physical plane. And there are beings that live on the physical plane, and us in these physical bodies. And then above that is the astral plane. And the astral plane is the plane of like emotion. And there are a lot of beings that live on this plane. Those ones, when you get to the astral plane, those are the ones you start not being able to see. And then above that is the soul plane. And the mental, that's where the soul lives, is in the mental body plane. And then above that, the Buddhic plane. So when we talk about subtle beings, the kind of beings we're talking to refer to where they reside. The beings that reside on the physical level are different from the ones that reside in the astral, that are different than the ones that are on the mental, and different than ones on the Buddhic. So when we are talking about the different kinds and what you can do with each one, getting their place is important. So here in this physical plane, we tend to think of, oh, it's just the bodies in physical form, but there's a higher plane, there's a higher part of the physical plane, and there are bodies that are not in actual form but are considered part of the physical plane, and these would be like nature devas. Deva is just another word for angel. Like I think it's from the Vedic, but when we talk about devas, it's basically the spirit of, or the soul of, but it's not on the soul plane. The devas live in the natural world. So when you're speaking about the subtle beings of trees or plants or the river or a mountain. These would be considered on this level, on the physical, though actually physical level. And when you do a shamanic journeying, you're journeying on this level. It's like the subtle part of the physical plane. It's not going up into the Buddhic, but it's going into what's just as deep and powerful about the physical. And this is really exciting. And this is kind of, this is a whole world that's really rich and is not as tapped into as like going to the higher planes to speak. There's a lot of things like plant medicine and the kinds of communications you have with plants or on plant medicine is part of this plane. And so the beings you would encounter are part of this physical plane of like the spirit of matter, which is still considered physical even in sort of the more ephemeral parts of it. So on this one, you could talk to like, well, there's the nature spirits, the devas, which are the spirits of the natural world. And everything like rocks have this, mountains, a river. And then each thing has several layers. You can speak to the individual plant. When you're speaking about that, like the individual plant, it doesn't have the same kind of consciousness that we do. So an individual plant isn't about like, oh, me and I grow this way and my neighbor grows that way. The individual plant is more tapped into a universal. So when you're speaking to a plant, you're speaking to one level, that's a universal level of this particular plant. And it's very similar with animals or minerals. They're very tapped into, there's almost no individuation because everything is shared. Everything is like moved through the group. So you could talk to an individual tree in the forest and it can have memories. That individual tree can have memories, but it's also going to have all the memories of all the trees that are in its group. And have the knowledge of all the trees that are in its group. So there, when you're speaking of these kind of spirits and talking to them, there's a certain kind of information you can get, and it's going to come in a way that is more like a we rather than an individual. The information that comes is speaking kind of as a group in it. And then there's that kind of more personal, what we would think of as a personal plane. And then above that, there's like the spirit of the tree, which is the spirit that guides, it's kind of like the soul, which would be the spirit of every one of that tree in the world has a united experience, and you could talk to that level of the beings. So there's different, even on the physical plane, there's different levels of the beings that you could talk to. There are also on this plane, there's going to be what we call like pixies or fairies, sprites, little like mischievous beings, which are also nature spirits. And they're kind of the nature of a certain place. Creates these little, they're like little guardians of a place, and they inhabit just like we do. They inhabit the whole area and the whole ecosystem, and they're part of the whole ecosystem. But they don't have something on the physical plane representing them. And then yeah, animals. You can speak to the spirit of animals, which will also be on this plane because it's very earthbound. Even the spirit of an animal is very earthbound. So you're speaking through the matter of it. You can speak to animals like the individual animals, but also just like the nature. Like you can speak to the nature of the wolf. You can speak to the nature of the earthworm to get the knowledge and wisdom that's incarnate in those. And then, as I said, like the natural environment. So a mountain will have a spirit. Every mountain has a spirit that you can actually speak with. That is a grand being full of wisdom, but it's full of the wisdom of the earth, and it has a connection to cosmos, but it's really rising up. It's the black snake energy of the earth rising up through that being of the mountain or a river or ocean, a lake. Every body of water has its own individual spirit. And yeah, I had a really interesting experience when I was in my Taoist mysticism school, where we went out to a lake, and and I could contact the spirit of the lake. Like I could feel it and I could kind of hear it, but I was like, this doesn't seem like this spirit is not native to here. Like there was something that was so foreign about it to the actual place. And I asked my teacher about it, and she said, well, this is a man-made lake. So this spirit actually moved in to this lake. So it inhabited it as this lake was created, and just as souls incarnate, um, the lake incarnated a spirit, and it actually was a spirit of another body of water that had disappeared, that chose to reincarnate into this particular lake. So it was a really interesting experience of like, oh wow, like us, they go through incarnations, and each incarnation has its own spirit, and that the same spirit can be in many incarnations, and it may be over like eons, or hundreds and hundreds of years, but that those spirits also are kind of regenerated. So the next plane and the kind of beings you can contact is the astral plane, and this is the one that gets the most, like, these are the ones we hear about the most. So the astral plane, or the energy plane, or the emotional plane, it's all the same. This is where ghosts are. This is entities and demons, things like this all reside on the astral plane. So that the astral plane, it works with the energy body and the emotional body. And this plane also, like as I said, includes people who have passed on, who haven't yet transcended, who haven't taken the next initiation, who also have not decided to continue an incarnation into another body. And so they can get kind of, if they're on the lower plane, they can just get stuck. If they have attachments, they can get stuck here, or they can have transcended and decide to come and stay on this plane to help, to assist. Sometimes it's just a very personal thing, like a mother passes on, but her child needs her still, so she stays around to help her child, whether it's actually helpful or not. This is the thing about the emotional plane, is the emotions are very cloudy. They can get really messy. They deal with the Maya and the illusion of an earthbound life. And so when you're stuck in the emotional plane, it's not such a pure, clear vibration, and the communication is not so pure, and it's not so, it can be helpful and it can be really not helpful. And yeah, it's also the plane where like there lots of havoc can be enacted on this plane. And it's partly because the entities on this plane feed off of emotion and any kind of fluctuation in that body, in the subtle body, in the energetic body, is food for these kinds of beings. And so they like to generate a lot of emotion so that they can feed on it and become stronger. Now, one of the great myths about the beings on this plane is that they can't really enact much action on the physical plane. They can only enact it through people, or if they put lots and lots of effort, they can make pictures fall off the wall or things move. But it takes so much effort that they'd have to like generate a big field of energy before they could actually do something like that. So that's why, like in houses like horror, like in the horror films, if there's a lot of fear generated, then that makes that being more powerful and they can actually enact more on this plane. But it's very difficult and takes a lot of like focus and energy. They have to gather a lot to do a little. And we are always going to be stronger on this plane. As long, people who are doing their work and can like keep their core strong will be stronger than any entity that tries to act in that way in the astral plane. So, and this is also this plane, there's so much fear generated around it. But I kind of take a bigger view of a long time ago when I was learning about demons and the evil that can reside on this plane. I made a decision of like I get to decide if evil exists or not. I get to decide if anything on this plane can actually interact with me in a way that's detrimental to me. And because it can only happen with consent of some sort. It may not be outward consent, but there's something in you that invites the kind of havoc that can be reached on this plane, that you have a need for a little drama to like push you through something. It's kind of like relational. It is relational. Like on this plane, we're still in the emotional realm, so everything is relational. So we can generate contact on this plane because we have an emotional need, and that our emotional unmet need or our emotional, like we're looking for polarities, and sometimes we need beings on this level to give us the polarity to work us through something, and sometimes that's about fear or fear of death, fear of the unknown, fear of magic or the invisible, and that's so on this plane it's very much about knowing where your weaknesses are, and then deciding for yourself, like, okay, like it's okay that I have this trauma or I have this polarity, but being aware of it, you can work with it, and you get to decide whether evil can have anything to do with you or not. That anything on this plane is actually, it's all part of us. It's all part of the bigger collective of human, and whether they were dead people who are actually incarnated, or um, they can be demons, or like what we classify, or I'm classifying as demons, which are actually thought forms. Demons are constructs that have taken on such an energetic form from conditioning, from humans conditioned into existence. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad or evil. Like there's a lot of, like, the demons that guard the Buddhist temples, for example. um People will see them, and they see them very, like, two different people will see the same form because it's a form that has been fed and created and then continually fed by humans in order for them to protect the temples. But this can also happen, like you can have demons who actually enact a lot of havoc by people projecting their fears. And when a whole group of people over many, many centuries projects this kind of thing onto a particular entity, it will eventually create a form of sorts, a form in the energetic world. And so that those creatures are very much like in relationship to the human world. They're not springing up from some other place. They're springing up from our deep psyche, from the depths of our imaginal realm, and creating an energetic form around that from our own deep inner places. So people who are really afraid or who have a lot of experiences in this realm are usually it's usually a sign that there's some inner weakness, fear, or something that they're needing to work through. So just like someone who keeps getting in a really bad relationship, these are relationships. With this on this plane, it's a relationship when you're if you keep getting into situations where you feel like you have entities attaching, or there are beings who are attacking you, or things like that. It's like there's some need for that inside you that needs to be dealt with, and then getting rid of the entity is a fairly easy task. It's cleanse it, but it's easy more easily done by someone, not you, who has the ability to step out of the situation, be on the outside of the situation, because it's hard to detach from your own inner workings. But it's much easier to take care of this than people think. Like you don't need to puke up pea soup and have your head spin around to get rid of an entity. It's actually a fairly simple process. What's not a simple process is going through and finding those places inside us that are the invitations, that are kind of the open doors for what we consider evil spirits to come in. And this is often the thing I talk to people about the most, because I have a lot of experience in this realm. So that, people fear that, like, possessions are something that happens out of their control. It's from the invisible world. They have no control over it whatsoever. That's what makes it super scary. But there is a lot of control, as in the physical realm. There are ways you can take care of yourself, uh, to make yourself safe, and to not invite those energies in. But those aren't the only kind of beings that live on the astral plane. That's just the ones that get the most hype. The movies are made about it. There's a lot of energy generated, as I said, because on this plane, that's what these beings feed off of. So that having that kind of energy field around it creates a rich food source for all the beings that are living here. But and what we would call, like, in my education, what we would call those, like, ghosts that create a lot of havoc, we call them hungry ghosts, because they need to feed. They have this codependent relationship on humanity. They're not willing to give up this physical plane totally. And so they have a need to feed. So we'd call them hungry ghosts. And they can be treated. You can get rid of hungry ghosts, but you can also help them transform. I've worked with some of them before, where some of them they just need that invitation of, like, you know what, you can go to the higher realm, like, just let it go, give up. And you can escort them or ask other beings to escort them to a higher realm, but it's totally up to them. Sometimes they just they're going to stay here, and they're going to find any way in that they possibly can. Um, um, So also on this level, I want to talk about possession, which is one of it's a big fear a lot of people have. So in my education, possession is any energetic pattern that was stronger than you at the moment you were introduced to it. That can get embedded in your system. And this can happen, in fact, most frequently in my practice, when I was doing a lot of work with this, it would happen in situations like car accidents or surgery, or when you would someone would take too much drugs or alcohol and become unconscious, like these places where our body's natural defenses were laid low. Then some other energetic force, and it could be anesthesia, it could be the fear surrounding a car accident. Like, someone shows up and is like, oh my God, there's this horrible car accident, and their fear, it invades your system. And that fear was so much that your body was in a lower state. So it took it on. So possession isn't always about, like, possession of a, evil, whatever. Possession is any energetic pattern that was stronger than you at the moment you were introduced to it. And then your body, if your body isn't naturally strong, it can be low at a moment, it can take on this, but if it can't throw it off, it will introduce this pattern inside of you. And when it happens, people usually really notice. They're like, I don't feel like myself. It's like there's a damper between me and my true nature. Or that they're starting to do things that seem irrational and not their normal pattern. Sometimes, like with anesthesia, it's just dullness, because the actual possession is from a chemical compound and not any kind of entity. And so it's just this, like, dullness and feeling separated from your life. maybe even just by a thin film, like you can function, but the functioning takes a lot more effort and it feels like moving through like a haze or a fog or a field that you can't, you're not as sharp as you usually are. And these, yeah, as possessions, as I said, like when you're having them, they are actually very easy to clear. And when you're in the case of something like you became unconscious, when it happens, then there's usually not a whole lot of work that needs to be done. Like if you had the case of being under anesthesia in a surgery or in an accident, um, there's not a whole lot of cleanup work because it's like, well, you were made unconscious intentionally by something else. And it really interesting when I would clear people of these possessions, especially from anesthesia, it would be so noticeable when we'd hit like the clearing that both me and the person I was working with could smell the surgery room. Like we could actually, like we would experience what had gotten trapped in their body. And it was pretty uncanny because it happened over and over again. I finally got used to it and I would warn people, but the first couple times I was in as much awe as the person I was working with because suddenly we're like, whoa, does that smell like anesthesia? Does this smell like a surgical room? And the surgery could have been months and months or even years before. But it was so interesting, like that energy, you could sense the full presence before it left the body. So yeah, possession is a big thing. It's one of the things people who know I do this work contact me the most about. And it generates a lot of fear, but there's really not a lot of, like the biggest defense you have is knowing that nothing on this level can do harm without some kind of consent, without some kind of working within your field of of you saying, you know, at some point saying yes to, whether you're conscious of it or unconscious. And sometimes like I've dealt with possession that's been from a loved one that has passed away, where they loved each other so much and they weren't ready to say goodbye. And so at that moment or in the moments or surrounding the death, the person who was dying actually became one, you know, with the energetic body of the person who is saying goodbye. And often, you know, of course you can feel like where the consent would be for that, like a mother who loses their child. Like this, how I saw several women with this, that a mother who lost the child and the child was holding on and the mother was so distraught of the losing a child that they reached out and pulled that energy. And but neither, it doesn't actually help either one. It can help in the short term of like feeling that energetic connection with your loved one, but it doesn't help them because they're then trapped in this world, and it doesn't help you because you are then trapped in this pattern of trying to make time stand still, trying to keep something from happening that has already happened, and can actually prevent that soul from further incarnation, from further development. My cats are causing a little havoc. That's not. This isn't like evidence of of the supernatural world here. It's my cats. Let's see. Let me just take my notes here. But everything on this plane isn't like evil or weird or, you know, um, there can be a lot of good that can happen working with the astral plane. Um, Ancestor work happens on this plane. Unwinding karma from your very personal ancestors, the ancestors of like as a whole, happens on this plane. Not entirely, but there's a lot of it that happens on this plane because, as I said, this plane is about relationship. And just like on the very physical plane, healing relationship is kind of, there's a lot of one-on-one work. that can happen, or even if you're just aspecting that kind of one-on-one work. On this plane, there's also a lot of that. So there's a lot of useful things you can do on this plane, as well as being able to contact, um, to ask questions, to gain knowledge, to really like get an understanding of what has transpired. Sometimes you can do work on this plane with newly departed souls when they're in that transitional phase to clear up loose ends, to take this moment to really like work through any issue you had with them on this plane so that they can leave cleanly and clearly. So this plane, there's a lot of really useful things that can happen communicating with beings on this plane. Uh, yeah, and it's really about building bridges. Yeah, you can burn through karma by building bridges. The higher level beings can use our volunteered offerings of our emotion to build bridges to fuel a collective process, and that's kind of really exciting about working in this plane, is because this emotional energy is built and we know these beings work on it. You can also intentionally give this energy to higher level beings in order to build a bridge. So that's also one of the useful things that can happen on this plane. Also on this plane, actually I'll put that a little bit further down the line. Never mind, scratch that. Okay, so let's move on to the mental plane or the soul plane. So by the time you're getting here, you're getting out of the emotional realm. And so on the mental plane, this is where souls are. So this is soul communication, and things get so much clearer. The astral plane can be muddy and there's a lot of vibration on it. There's a lot of energy around it. And when you get to the mental plane or the plane of the soul, it's like the higher realm of the higher couple layers of the mental plane, things become crystal clear. This is soul to soul communication. So this is subtle beings in the soul realm. It's not transcended past that realm. It's not like past the fourth or fifth initiation, but these are beings that are fully embodied in soul, in purpose. And souls incarnate for many, many, many lifetimes. And so your communication that happens with beings at this end has a lot to do with purpose and clarity and focus. And by the time you're communicating in this realm, you have offered yourself up in service to humanity, in service to the whole, in service to the greater good. And the beings on this level are also in that purpose. And so the communication that happens here is much clearer, cleaner. It really it hits at deeper levels. It doesn't create so much of an you might have emotional spin-off afterwards, but while the communication is happening, there's this sense of being really crystal clear and centered. And there's this deep, deep knowing, where on the astral plane, the kind of communication that happens, there's not always a very deep knowing at all. There's in fact can be a lot of confusion, a lot of not quite knowing what's right or wrong or what's here or there. But by the time you reach the higher levels of the mental plane, soul to soul communication, this communication, because it's so focused on purity and on purpose, all the bullshit is dropped. It's not about games, it's not about emotions, it's working for the greater good of the collective. And so things here are really, they're a lot more straightforward and a lot more powerful in the internal generation of useful energy. This energy is very directed, and On the astral plane, it can be really scattered. On this plane, it's very focused and directed. It brings a lot of intuition, a lot of just knowing, like a deep knowing without the sometimes without the story of how you know what you know, but soul to soul communication. And this is like your deepest part. By the time you're here, you are in your soul. You can't communicate, you cannot communicate with someone else's soul without being in your soul. Like you're on your higher plane, you're the part of you that lives through many, many incarnations. And once you learn to reach that plane, once you have a deep connection with that plane, you can start to communicate with other souls much more easily, and that they will be able to communicate with you. And so this is the plane also where you can meet beings who are in your ashram, in like your gang of do-gooders, in that realm of beings that are here as a collective to do something, to bring about some purpose in the whole scheme of the cosmos. So like this is where you meet your posse, is on this plane. And you can meet them like when you're speaking in soul language to soul beings, you can speak to the soul of humans who are still incarnated on this planet, who are not in subtle form, but this is like the subtle form of them. Sometimes, I mean, often, most people don't have a clear, grounded connection with this part of themselves. But if you are coming from your soul, if you are seated in that place, you can speak to their soul. And a lot of things can happen on this plane that bypasses all the story of the lower planes. It bypasses all the story of the like interpersonal communications. You can have this relationship soul to soul, but you can also have it with souls who may not actually be incarnated in this moment, or souls who have taken the higher initiations, have burned away, and when they burn away, like the ones who have a lot of purpose, actually little bits of their soul go out. They are transmitted to other people who are part of their ashram. So when you reach a higher level, and I don't even know what level of initiation it is, maybe the fifth or sixth, probably around the fifth or sixth, that that purpose is transmitted through soul, and little bits of soul become parts of other souls. They have burned off their soul, but this purpose becomes a way an ashram is built. It's like the little microchip or something that says, hey, you belong in this ashram, because the soul has burned away, has created this field of an energetic field that magnetizes, and little bits of their soul actually incarnate through other souls who are here to do this work. So you can contact on that level as well. You can contact even higher level beings through this soul realm. There's not so much stuff in this, so there's not as much talk. I mean, the way to communicate in the soul realm is figuring out how to get to your soul, and either that's through consciousness meditation, heart meditation, base meditation. You can bring the soul in on any of those levels, and having it on all three is going to give you the biggest base. But that's what you need to actually communicate with any being on this level, on the mental plane. Okay, so now we're going up to the Buddhic plane, or the unincarnated, or the masters. These are beings who, some of them have lived through many incarnations, gone through all the lessons of an incarnated life, have gone through the initiations, mastered the content. Basically, they're graduated through the college or the university of souls into some higher realms, and so they're taking on a great deal of responsibility. And this is basically like DK is one of these souls, Christ, Magdalene, Moria, Master Moria. Like the masters are souls. They have gone past their soul realm. They have burned their souls, created an ashram, and are now here to transmit. Now they can transmit down through all of these layers. So unlike the soul level, you don't need to come from soul to talk to these beings, but it's super helpful to really get to this crystal clear plane, to be able to communicate really clearly with that. And but these beings can communicate with any realm. It's usually like when you haven't done the work to get to the soul plane, they communicate through like peak experiences, people like life-changing experiences, those moments of grace where something so big happens that it alters your view completely. um, that's like these beings contacting us on whatever level we're at. Now the higher you get, the more that communication can go both ways, the more it becomes a two-way street, the more uh, consistently you can hold this, so the wisdom coming down through them can get anchored in your system, in your body. um, and a lot of other things can happen on this plane. So there's these souls, I mean, not these entities or beings on this plane that have gone through the whole journey, and there's also beings that maybe have more of a cosmic origin, that haven't necessarily incarnated so much on this plane, but they hold this greater wisdom, like insane amounts of energetic uh, downloading through their system, because they're part of a greater purpose. They're like the task force of cosmos, and they're really working to bring about certain things. And there's not a personal identity, there's not so much an I. They communicate with us from a place where we can identify them as a discrete individual, because it's easier for us to understand and to comprehend what they're saying in that realm. But in their realm, they don't exist on that level. They don't exist as an I. They don't exist as, okay, this is DK, this is Christ, this is Magdalene. Um, their vibration of purpose is united, and they each have a kind of a flavor of that vibration. But they don't identify as an I. They don't identify as an individual being. We identify them as an individual, discrete being, because that's the easiest way for us to form a relationship. Like, we're still very relational beings, and for us to really comprehend where they're coming from, it's easier for us to come from our I to their I. And so that format, like we work within that until we can work on a, like, coming at it from the bigger place where our I dissolves, which, you know, most of us have a long way to go before we get to that place where we can communicate on their level. We can communicate in the way that they communicate with one another. They're communicating with us in the way that we understand, because we still believe we're an I. We still believe that we're a discrete individual. But they have transcended that. And so, you know, it's like they're speaking to us in our own language, which is really, really kind of them. Really, like, oh, it's part of their purpose, but it's like, right, okay, they're coming down to my level so I can understand. And for them, it's actually a great sacrifice. It's a great sacrifice to, they, you know, they could be off in the higher realms doing all higher realm work, and they're like, no, we, like, the purpose is to help all these beings achieve, like, to get through these levels. And so for them, it's a bit of a sacrifice to come and really work with us at our level, you know, at our, where the capacity we have of understanding. So those are the planes and the kinds of beings that live on each plane. But a lot of the questions I've gotten about entities are like, well, how do you know who you're talking to? You know, like, if you're just, you know, on this plane and you don't have a lot of experience, how do you know what kind of entity you're talking to? Like, how do you know if it's a master or like your dead uncle? How do you know it's someone like you should be listening to or what kind of advice it is? So, the best thing you can do to get yourself calibrated is to know what plane you're really working at. And this is a lot of the work that we do in Shambhala school and through Haydn, is working through the physical, the the personality, mind, body, and then getting to the soul, and then getting to the higher plane. So the monad, being able to like work in and through your monad. And so this is the best way that you can know where you're at, is if you know where you're at, you know what kind of beings you are able to talk to. You have to have some kind of contact with your monad to, and it could have been brief and it could just be a peak experience, but having some vibration, some kind of reference point for your monad to experience the beings on the Buddhic plane. You have to have some reference to your soul to experience beings on the soul plane. And you have to have some reference to your own emotional body to experience being on the astral plane. And not everyone has that. I mean, that's a plane most people are used to working in, but people who are very in just the physical plane don't even have communication with their own emotional bodies to be able to communicate on that plane. When you're in the astral plane, there's a lot of fuzziness. There's a lot of not clear, like things are not clear. There's fogginess. And so if you are wondering like, okay, something's happened, like I'm having an experience and something is communicating with me, what kind of residue, what kind of vibration is your body going through? Where are you in your own experience of these planes, to know like where that being is from that you're communicating with. Now there's, as I said, on the physical body, there's sort of like the astral plane of a lot of emotional stuff, but there's also like a pure plane of the devas, of the spirit of the natural world, in which you have to have contact with that part of you. That's sort of like the monad of earth, that part of you, that's part of that black dragon of earth. So you can get super pure, really clear information from that realm that's not going up to the Buddhic plane, but is going down through into that plane within the earth and within this vibration. So it's not that these things on this plane are all just emotional body or just mind body stuff or personality stuff. There's some really huge deep wisdom, and I think this is part of these new teachings coming through, is integrating all of this wisdom, that we've reached out and up a lot and we haven't reached down as with as much consistency as we've reached up. And but there is a lot of like the shamanic tradition, or a lot of native cultures are used to being in this realm. Like this is really highly developed in some of the more what's the word I'm trying to think of a word, but of the like tribal cultures are really well versed in this realm of communicate, as well as the higher realms, but they're really well versed. And the Western culture has separated itself as having like dominion over this realm, and so we think of ourselves as separate and have created this hierarchy and have projected a lot of illusion onto this realm of existence. So there's this pure form of communication that can rise up from the earth, and then there's this pure form that can descend down, and both of those you're going to get really there's a different vibration that happens with each, but it's going to feel really embodied and clear. Like for me, the earth realms, I I pick up information through my physical form, and then in the cosmic realms through consciousness. But both of those have a note of clarity. They have a note of being uncomplicated. And they also have a note that what is being transmitted, I already know. I'm just remembering. There's a remembering of like, right, of course. Yeah, I know that. Where if you're in that middle astral plane, um, it's like, what? Oh, that's happening? There's a, like, it feels like new information or different information, or there can be a lot of confusion or details, like a lot of details that you're not sure what's the important parts and what's not the important part, because it's very relational in that astral plane. Um, so knowing who you're talking to is going to be a very internal experience, and it's going to be mostly about having a lot of experience and basing it off of your own knowing, your own having gone to different places and saying, oh, okay, I've met this person and this is how it feels. I've met this being and this is how it feels. So a lot of it will come from experience and being able to work your way through the different layers and different levels. All right, and one of the other questions is, how do you contact specific beings? And this all depends on the plane you're at. You can contact, you can contact on any level, and you can actually send out, like, like picking up the phone, like, hey, I want to talk to. But just as in that kind of communication, the being on the other end can pick up or not pick up. And your level of being able to transmit is what's going to make that other end pick up or not pick up. What you're transmitting, and how, with what kind of strength and force and clarity you're transmitting. So if you want to contact someone on the physical plane, it's a very physical, like connecting with that entity, connecting with that being in some way, either having something physical that either has been theirs, like if it's a person, having something that was theirs that they actually touched when they were in a physical body, or something that is like something that represents that. Like if it's not someone that you knew in this world, but you actually want to connect with, you can connect with some physical thing that represents where they have come from. When you want to connect with higher plane, a lot has to do with intention and focus. Well, any of the planes, actually, intention and focus. And then there's a surrender of opening yourself up, because in contact there's a bit of needing to be vulnerable, needing to be open to whatever comes, however it comes, like being able to listen, basically. Like if you're having a conversation with anyone, when you listen and they know that you're listening, they will then communicate more. They will communicate greater amounts. But if you're not listening, you're not going to take it in. So there's that vibration of being open to surrender to listening in the way that they communicate. So, in the nature devas, being able to listen with this really open thing. Like sometimes they'll talk to you in your language, but sometimes they will speak to you in their language, and you have to be willing to like sit in the, like, oh, this is different than what I'm used to, but this is the actual communication. So it comes to really paying attention to subtleties and knowing what yeah, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with listening to subtle languages, because it's so easy to brush off. It's so easy, if it's not what we're used to pretend like it has no meaning. And so part of the surrender is allowing that for any information coming through sensation, through your mental body, your physical body, through the emotional realm, and just letting it come. And my best practice is not making meaning in the moment, is letting whatever comes at the moment, sitting with it, and then making meaning later, like letting the meaning come. Often from higher realms, meaning comes like in these packages that's instantaneous knowing. And it's only later that like I can unpack it. In the moment, it's all I can do just to like let that land. These packages, it's almost like these like discrete packages of knowing are just like, it's almost like they're revealed inside me, and then later I can dissect it. But in that moment, all it's like overwhelming, and there's such a force. And there's also this like, yeah, of course. There's almost a way that in communicating in those realms, everything feels so obvious that I'm like, well, yeah, right, of course this happens. And it's only later that I'm like, that's actually a new insight for my personality. But on the part of me that was communicating, it was like, yeah, I know this already. I already know this. So yeah, communicating, like if you want to communicate with specific people on the lower realms, having that intention, the focus, and also a way to like having their number, like having something that can connect you with them, and that they can feel the vibration of something calling them and pulling them into it. And also with the higher planes, it may not be a physical thing, but connecting with that part of you that has purpose, focus. The part of you that is connected to your monad can connect with things on the monadic plane. The part of you that's connected to your soul can connect with things, being entities on the soul plane. So being able to have that language, like your own internal language. Technologies you can use for connection, altars. We cover that in earlier classes. They are ways to connect to the ancestors. You can put DK on your altar. You can put Magdalene on your altar. If you want to connect with them, you'll eventually build a bridge. If you, with enough focus, enough intention, enough, putting yourself on that altar, putting offerings on that altar, and you'll build a bridge between your energy and theirs. And it may be very subtle at first, and it'll grow over time. Sometimes it can come down all at once. But altars are great technology for contacting very specific beings. Sacred places. So going to sacred sites that were either sacred to that particular entity or just places where the veils are thin. Temples, sacred sites, sites of great trauma and graveyards are also, like if you're trying to connect the astral plane, are really, they're super rich and potent. They're also really like dicey as far as what kind of energy you're going to get. So we'll go over that in a little bit, like the kind of clarity you need and the kind of like protection you might need on that level. But yeah, so sacred places are another technology you can use for connecting. And then sacred times, times when the veils are thin. So like equinoxes, solstices, eclipses, specific dates that something happened, some great event happened. You can use that as a time when the veils are thinner. The cross quarters, like Beltane and Imbolic and those times, new moons, full moons, and certain astrological transit can help you focus your energy and get through to specific beings. All right. So how do they contact us? We can put out calls to contact specific beings, but sometimes beings contact us. And this is how it's usually happened for me, is it's like I think at a very young age, I realized I'm kind of I must be an open portal or like there's some way, because the beings have contacted me for a very long, before I even knew what any of this was. I was having contact with specific beings. And I think many people, many people do. It's just that, we tend to brush it off. We tend to pretend it's not important or make it, we don't utilize that energy as much. So beings like on the physical plane, beings can contact us through emotions, bringing up emotions, memories, moving physical objects, like, ghosts, poltergeists, things like that. uh, those are ways that things on that plane can contact us. Nature spirits can contact us. It's For me, it has been very clear when a nature spirit needed to talk to me. It would like I I can experience in my physical body, it's almost like someone tapping me on the shoulder, or like breathing on the back of my neck, or like there's a presence that's right. I can feel it through my physical body, that it's like insistent that it needs to speak. For me, and there's probably other ways, but for me, that has been a very, like when nature spirits need to talk to me, it's a very physical experience, and very, I can almost feel like when a plant spirit wanted to talk to me once, I felt like someone was shoving me on the back of my shoulder. Like it was such a physical experience, even though it was in the subtle realms. And there a lot of insistence, and but also insistence with this great loving presence, with this overarching, like, this is urgent, and it is also in love. It's urgent, and there's also nothing to fear. Like, I've never felt any kind of trepidation when a nature spirit approached me. Now, some of the, like, pixies, fairies, things like that, they're very mischievous, and sometimes they can be just like annoying, and um, they can put up some other kind of energies. So those kind of spirits can come in and sometimes be insistent, but also a little mischievous, a little, like, little, cause a little trouble. They like a little bit of trouble. And they're also kind of jokers. They can put out a lot of energy that's really like um, trickster energy. It's kind of their one of their ways of communicating. Um, and then, yeah, and on the plane, they can also contact us through noises, or like, I used to be able to hear conversations that were like just out of earshot, that I could only catch a word or two uh, of, yeah, like in places I lived that were, haunted or whatever. Like there were noises that I could just almost hear, but not quite, and it would pique my interest enough to decide whether I wanted to engage or not engage. Um, Higher realms, for me, there's almost always this sense of like heart opening, and it can sometimes be super intense energy, like lightning energy, this ecstatic electric current uh, that can proceed and also precipitate those downloads, because it feels almost like these discrete packages coming in of knowledge or experience. But those ones for me usually occur, it feels like it's all at once, and then later I get to unpack and make meaning and figure out exactly what has been transmitted. Sometimes it comes like voices, like you can actually hear speaking, or feel speaking, feel communication happening within you. But from the higher realms, it's going to be super clear. There's not confusion. It's urgent, and there's not going to be this muddy realm of film around it. It's super like crystalline, comes in super crystalline. So why would you want to contact subtle beings? Like what can be done on this realm? Like why would you even want to play in this realm? Well, dead people, people who've passed on is because you miss them, or you just want more communication, or you need to wrap things up. Um, Ancestors, like doing ancestor work is actually really important. It's how we unwind karma and help our evolutionary path. Uh, Black magic can be done. I certainly don't recommend it, but that's why some people would contact this realm, making deals with other entities, making contracts of like, okay, you do this for me, I'll do this for you. And there's a lot of people who've gotten very powerful using this kind of magic, creating deals with subtle beings that maybe don't have the most beneficial intentions. A part of that is necromancy, like having the spirits of the dead working for you. So this would be like a contract, like I will feed you energy in some way, sometimes from me, but often people in necromancy will feed energy from other people. This is where you get into the real karmic mess of black magic, feeding energy from other people. I've seen people do this, like really charismatic people who have a high level of spiritual contact without the purity of personality, purity of intention, creating deals with other entities, like you make me famous, you make me rich, you bring me lots of power. I will take energy from all the people and channel it to you. So you get energy to feed off of. I get, fame, wealth, power, whatever it is, feeling of importance. There can be lots of examples of that. Those are not ones I recommend. Um, Shamanic beings or nature spirits. There's wisdom, comfort, nourishment, deep like sense of belonging that can come from that realm. Uh, Knowing there's a way it can formulate purpose, these relationships, and um you can use this realm, communication on this realm, to actually mitigate traumas, like that big traumas, like land traumas, cultural traumas, like little by little doing remediation work for the land and for culture, for humanity, through these layers of going back to sites of genocide and working with the spirits that live there, and helping them move on, working with the trauma that is embedded in the soil, helping to disperse it, just like in our bodies we hold on to places of trauma that we need to like work through. You can go to places on the planet that have held this trauma. That same thing happens, this condensation, this holding of emotion within a space. So working with subtle beings, you can go and help open those up and create places where energy can then move through, the life force can move through in the way it's supposed to. So remediation work, on a planetary level, on an earth level, on a personal level, ancestor work. And then like communicating with souls, like bringing purpose, soul communication, creating understanding between souls, like really like there's a lot of things, like if you're having interpersonal problems with someone but you go to the soul level, you can actually speak on the soul level, from soul to soul. It will filter down and help whoever you're talking to on the physical level, like they may not understand it, they may not get it, but they'll get some resonance of vibration of, oh, okay, like I have trust, this is going to be okay. And then of course, like, what's being done through DK, what's being done through all these other realms of talking to beings on the Buddhic plane, of like this is what we need you to do. This is what's happening on earth, opening up to this energy, like being able to open ourselves to this energy coming through to help the evolution of the entire, planet and also the cosmos. All right, so I want to close by bringing up just a few things about very, very important things about being able to communicate on the subtle realms to subtle beings is how to take care of yourself. Um, there's different, as I was speaking on the astral plane, it's really messy. Like you are dealing with emotional stuff, and there are beings that are of great power, but it's not purity. There's not purity on that plane. So anything you're doing in that astral plane, or anything you think might be in that plane, or you're not even sure if it's that plane or not, you need to pay special attention of really cleansing yourself during and after that process, which can be like creating energetic vortexes, blah, 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 candles, incense, salt baths, things like that. Uh, knowing where your weaknesses are, and where this is one of the biggest things you can do is do your own soul work, do your own personality work, like work through those layers where you know you have weaknesses. It doesn't mean you have to eradicate a weakness, but knowing you have it makes you be able to protect yourself better when you come in contact. When you're working with higher planes, part of taking care of yourself is knowing what you can handle, knowing how much you are able to open yourself and how much current is reasonable for you. You can do a lot of, if you open yourself up to too much too soon, uh, you can become crazy cat lady, like you can really, like, you can tap into things that are so traumatic for the rest of you that you have a hard time then processing, and then go into being kind of unavailable for other work needing to be done because you've taken on just too much at once. When you're starting to deal with the higher realms, you're going to get a lot of crystal clear clarity, and you're going to get a lot of their whole mission is to burn off all that karma, and they will burn it as quickly as allowed. But the rest of you may not be able to handle that. The rest of you may not be able to keep up, and can completely incapacitate you. And it's a kind of an oscillation of going back and forth between being completely incapacitated and then taking on lots of current. And eventually your capacity for current gets greater, and your incapacitation can go through phases of getting like more manageable and smaller. And then sometimes you can take on another large chunk of current and it takes you out again. But at least like the more you're taken out, the more you realize how much you get the internal monitor of how much you can take on, and also what's actually trying to come through, and knowing how to deal with it better, and knowing how to take on just enough that you can remain productive, you can keep going, and really like live out your purpose. And then also like, okay, and then going into the times where you're like, and now I'm taken out again and I need to just like recover and catch up to that. So being able to modify how much according to what you feel like you have the capacity for. And that capacity over time will change, just like, if you're like starting an exercise program, you'll eventually be able to like take on more weights or run further. The same thing will happen in these, like, so having the practice and consistency in practice can help you be able to take on more charge and more capacity, and will burn through in your soul work and come through more clearly. All right. Well, I'm going to, that's what I have for you today. And thanks for listening. And I'm going to take a break from these classes for a little while till I'm starting a pilgrimage through the temples. And I'm just going to see when I have internet and interest, for doing these, but thank you so much. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments to all those who are on the recordings. I mean, who are listening to the recordings and not here live, and I'll be happy to answer them. Close the recording now, and anyone live can ask questions. Thank you so much.